Michael Harrison dropped his coffee mug, ceramic shattering across the cabin floor as his eyes locked onto the massive gray wolf trembling at his doorstep. Blood matted the creature's silver fur, and those familiar amber eyes he remembered from 6 years ago, stared directly into his soul with desperate recognition. This wasn't just any wolf begging for sanctuary. This was Alpha, the orphaned pup he'd bottle-fed and released back into the Montana wilderness, now returned as a 130-pound predator seeking the one human he'd ever trusted. The wolf's front paws left crimson prints on the wooden porch as it collapsed, a bullet wound visible along its shoulder. Michael's hands trembled as he knelt beside the animal that should have forgotten him years ago, yet somehow had traveled miles through dangerous territory to find this exact cabin. "My God, what happened to you, boy?" Michael whispered, his voice breaking as Alpha weakly lifted his massive head and placed a bloodied paw on Michael's outstretched hand, the same gesture of trust from their last goodbye. What horror had driven this wild creature back to his door? Leave a like and share your thoughts in the comments along with the city you're watching from now. Let's continue with the story. Michael Harrison had never imagined that 3 years of self-imposed exile could be shattered by 4 paws and a pair of amber eyes. His remote cabin, nestled 30 miles from the nearest town of Glacier Falls, Montana, had become both sanctuary and prison since that devastating night when everything changed. The accident replayed in his mind every morning, Sarah's silver Honda wrapped around an ancient pine tree on Highway 2. Twisted metal glinting under emergency lights. He was supposed to drive her to her sister's that evening, but a last-minute emergency call about suspected poachers had kept him late at the ranger station. "Go ahead, honey," he'd said, barely looking up from his paperwork. "I'll catch up later." Those were the last words he'd ever speak to his wife of 15 years. After the funeral, Michael couldn't bear the pitying looks from fellow rangers or the well-meaning casseroles from neighbors. He turned in his badge, sold their house in town, and retreated to his grandfather's old hunting cabin deep in the Glacier National Forest. The inheritance had sat empty for decades, but Michael transformed it into a fortress of solitude, solar panels for power, a well for water, and a small vegetable garden that kept him fed while keeping the world at bay. The cabin's log walls had witnessed Michael's transformation from a respected forest ranger to a hermit who spoke more to ravens than humans. His days followed a rigid routine: chopping wood, tending his garden, reading worn paperbacks by lamplight, and avoiding the outside world that had taken everything from him. Wildlife came and went freely around his property. Deer grazed in his clearing, black bears raided his compost, and mountain lions left tracks near his water source. He never hunted, never trapped, simply coexisted with the creatures that seemed to understand his need for peace. But 6 years ago, before Sarah's death, before his exile, Michael had been a different man. He'd found a wolf pup near a logging road, barely 3 weeks old, with a distinctive white patch on its chest shaped like a lightning bolt. The mother was nowhere to be found, likely killed by vehicles or hunters. Against protocol, Michael had brought the pup home, bottle-feeding it every few hours, teaching it to hunt small prey in their backyard. Sarah had named him Alpha because even as a tiny creature, the pup displayed a commanding presence that made their German shepherd defer to him. For 8 weeks, Alpha had been part of their family. He'd sleep curled between Michael and Sarah, follow Michael on his ranger patrols, and display an intelligence that bordered on unnatural. When Alpha grew large enough to survive in the wild, Michael had made the heartbreaking decision to release him deep in the forest, knowing it was right, but feeling like he was abandoning a child. Now, as Michael cradled Alpha's massive head in his lap, feeling the wolf's labored breathing against his chest, he realized that some bonds transcend time, distance, and even species. Alpha had remembered. After all these years, through all that pain, he'd come home, The bullet had grazed Alpha's left shoulder, leaving an angry red furrow through his silver-gray fur. Michael's hands moved with practiced efficiency, drawing on 15 years of ranger training as he cleaned the wound with antiseptic. The wolf lay perfectly still on the cabin's wooden floor, amber eyes never leaving Michael's face, trusting completely despite the sting of the disinfectant. "Easy, boy," Michael murmured, his voice rusty from months of disuse. "I've got you." Alpha's massive head rested on Michael's thigh just as it had when he was a pup, and the familiar weight brought tears to Michael's eyes. The wolf had grown magnificent, 130 pounds of pure muscle and intelligence, with scars across his muzzle that spoke of battles won and territories defended. But those eyes, those unmistakable amber eyes with flecks of gold around the pupils, were exactly the same. As Michael bandaged the wound, Alpha suddenly lifted his head and padded toward the cabin's back corner, where an old wooden crate still sat. Inside were remnants from 6 years ago, a red collar that had never been used, a worn tennis ball, and Alpha's favorite blanket. The wolf carefully picked up the collar in his massive jaws and brought it to Michael, dropping it at his feet with a soft whine. Michael's breath caught. "You remember everything, don't you?" The collar was meant to be Alpha's graduation gift before his release into the wild, a symbol that he'd always have a home here. Michael had kept it all these years, unable to throw away the last connection to happier times. Alpha returned to the door, scratching at the wood with increasing urgency. He'd walk to the entrance, look back at Michael, then repeat the behavior, a clear pattern of communication that Michael recognized from his ranger days. The wolf wanted him to follow, needed him to understand something critical. "Oh, what is it, boy? What happened out there?" Michael asked, kneeling beside Alpha. The wolf's response was immediate and heartbreaking, a low, mournful howl that raised every hair on Michael's arms. It was a sound he'd heard only once before in his career, the night he'd discovered a female wolf mourning over her dead mate. This was the cry of loss, of grief so profound it transcended species. Michael's stomach tightened with dread. Alpha wasn't just injured, he was traumatized. The wolf's eyes held a haunted quality that Michael recognized in his own mirror, the 1,000-yard stare of someone who had witnessed unspeakable horror. Alpha moved to the cabin's old cedar chest, where Sarah used to store quilts. The wolf pawed at it until Michael opened the lid, revealing photo albums from their marriage. Alpha had somehow remembered that this chest contained memories, meaningful objects. The wolf's intelligence was staggering, but what chilled Michael was the deliberate nature of these actions. Alpha was trying to tell him a story. The wolf returned to the door once more, this time bringing Michael his hiking boots in his mouth. The message was clear. They needed to go somewhere together. Michael's hermit instincts screamed warnings. He hadn't left his property in over a year, hadn't spoken to another human in 6 months. The outside world meant pain, meant memories he couldn't face. But Alpha's next action shattered his resolve. The wolf limped to the fireplace and lay down in the exact spot where he used to sleep as a pup, then looked up at Michael with such profound trust and need that Michael's carefully constructed walls crumbled. This creature had traveled through dangerous wilderness, wounded and alone, to find the one human who had ever shown him unconditional love. "All right, boy," Michael whispered, his voice breaking. "I hear you. We'll go wherever you need to show me." He pulled on his boots with shaking hands, grabbed his emergency pack and first aid kit, and opened the cabin door. The morning air was crisp with the promise of autumn, carrying scents of pine and distant wood smoke. Alpha immediately headed toward the tree line, moving with purpose despite his injury. Every few steps he'd pause to ensure Michael was following, golden eyes reflecting gratitude and determination. As they entered the forest, Michael felt the familiar rhythm of the wilderness, the crunch of pine needles underfoot, the whisper of wind through branches, the distant call of a hawk circling overhead. But there was something wrong with the forest's harmony. Birds were too quiet, and the usual rustle of small animals in the underbrush was absent. Alpha's hackles rose as they moved deeper into the woods, and Michael's ranger instincts began firing warning signals. Something had disturbed the natural balance of this ecosystem, something that had driven a wolf pack leader to seek human help. Whatever Alpha needed to show him, Michael realized with growing dread, was going to change everything once again. 5 miles into the dense Montana wilderness, Alpha led Michael to a hidden valley that should have been filled with the sounds of life. Instead, an unnatural silence hung over the landscape like a shroud. The wolf stopped at the edge of a clearing, his massive body trembling not from his wound but from something far deeper, a terror that seemed to emanate from his very soul. Michael's trained eye immediately recognized the signs of carnage. 8 adult wolves lay scattered across the meadow in positions that defied nature's laws. These weren't the random casualties of territorial disputes or natural deaths. Each animal had been killed with clinical precision, single gunshot wounds to the head, their bodies arranged in a grotesque display that spoke of human cruelty beyond comprehension. "Jesus Christ," Michael whispered, his voice lost in the oppressive quiet. His legs nearly gave out as he approached the first body, a magnificent black female, her amber eyes still open and staring sightlessly at the sky. Beside her lay 3 pups, no more than 6 months old, their small forms clustered together as if they'd been trying to hide behind their mother when death found them. Alpha moved through the massacre with the slow, deliberate steps of a survivor revisiting a nightmare. He approached each fallen pack member, touching his nose to their still forms in what could only be described as a final farewell. The raw grief in the wolf's actions was almost too painful to witness. This had been his family, his responsibility, and he had failed to protect them. Michael's ranger training kicked in despite his emotional turmoil. These weren't random killings or even typical poaching. The precision of the shots, the strategic placement of the bodies, the complete absence of defensive wounds, this was the work of professionals. Someone had executed this entire pack with military efficiency, turning a thriving family unit into a gruesome monument to human hatred. As he examined the scene more closely, Michael discovered evidence that made his blood run cold. Snare traps were still set around the perimeter of the clearing, their steel cables glinting in the filtered sunlight. Professional skinning tools lay abandoned near several of the bodies, and ATV tracks cut deep gouges through the soft earth, leading to an old logging road. This hadn't been a quick kill. It had been a calculated slaughter designed to harvest every valuable part of these magnificent creatures. Alpha led him to a dense thicket at the far edge of the clearing, pushing through brambles that caught at his wounded shoulder. Hidden beneath the tangled branches was a shallow depression in the earth, a makeshift den where the wolf had been hiding for weeks. The space was littered with bone fragments and the remains of small prey, evidence of Alpha's desperate attempts to survive alone in a world that had suddenly become hostile. "This is where you've been living," Michael said softly, his heart breaking at the image of this proud pack leader reduced to cowering in the underbrush like a common scavenger. Alpha's response was a low whine that seemed to contain all the loneliness and fear of the past weeks. The wolf had watched his family die, had barely escaped with his own life, and had spent every day since then waiting for the killers to return. Michael knelt beside the smallest pup's body, a gray and white female who couldn't have been more than 4 months old. Her tiny form was curled in a defensive position, and Michael could see where she'd tried to crawl toward the safety of the trees before the bullets found her. The sight triggered a rage so pure and consuming that his hand shook as he gently closed the pup's eyes. "Who did this to you?" he asked Alpha, though he knew the wolf couldn't answer in words. But Alpha's response was more eloquent than any human speech. He led Michael to a spot near the largest male wolf's body and began pawing at the ground. Buried in the soft earth was a spent rifle cartridge, still bearing the scent of recent use. The caliber was .308, a favorite among professional hunters, and the precision of the shot placement suggested someone with extensive training and expensive equipment. As Michael examined the cartridge, a memory surfaced from his ranger days. Reports of a poaching ring operating throughout the northern Rockies, targeting wolves for their pelts and body parts. The illegal wildlife trade was worth millions of dollars, with wolf fur commanding premium prices in overseas markets and certain body parts believed to have medicinal properties in traditional medicine practices. Alpha suddenly tensed, his hackles rising as his nose tested the wind. The wolf's entire body went rigid with alertness, and Michael followed his gaze toward the logging road where fresh tire tracks were visible in the mud. Someone had been here recently, possibly within the last day or two. The killers might still be in the area, or worse, they might be planning to return. The realization hit Michael like a physical blow. Alpha hadn't just come to him for healing or comfort. The wolf had sought out the one human he trusted because he knew the danger wasn't over. These weren't random killers who would disappear after one massacre. They were part of something larger, more organized, and they would continue their slaughter until someone stopped them. Michael stood slowly, his mind racing with the implications. He'd spent 3 years hiding from the world, avoiding responsibility and human connection. But Alpha had brought him back to a reality he couldn't ignore. Innocent creatures were being systematically murdered, and he possessed the knowledge and skills to do something about it. "I understand now, boy," Michael said, his voice steady for the first time in years. "You didn't just come home for help. You came to bring me back to the fight." Alpha's amber eyes met his with an intelligence that bordered on supernatural, and Michael could swear he saw approval in that golden gaze. They buried the pups together as the sun began to set, Alpha helping to scrape earth over the small forms with his powerful paws. As darkness fell over the massacre site, Michael made a promise that would change both their lives forever. "We're going to find who did this, and we're going to make them pay." The next morning, Michael broke his 3-year vow of isolation by dialing a number he'd memorized but never thought he'd use again. Ranger Susan Martinez answered on the second ring, her familiar voice cutting through the static of his old satellite phone like a lifeline to the world he'd abandoned. "Michael, is that really you?" Susan's shock was palpable. They'd been partners for 7 years before Sarah's death, and she'd tried countless times to reach him during his exile. "Where the hell have you been?" "I need your help, Susan," Michael said, watching Alpha pace restlessly near the cabin's window. The wolf hadn't slept since their return from the massacre site, his amber eyes constantly scanning the tree line for threats that might emerge from the shadows. "There's been a wolf pack massacre about 5 miles northeast of my grandfather's cabin. 8 adults and 3 pups, all executed." The silence on the other end stretched long enough that Michael wondered if the connection had failed. When Susan finally spoke, her voice was grim with recognition. "Jesus, Michael, that makes 4 packs in 6 months. We've got a federal task force investigating, but these bastards are ghosts. They hit fast, clean out everything valuable, and disappear without leaving any solid evidence." Michael's blood chilled at the confirmation of his worst fears. This wasn't an isolated incident. It was part of a systematic campaign of extermination. 4 packs. How many animals total?" 37 wolves dead, Susan replied, her voice heavy with exhaustion. "All killed the same way. Precision shots, professional harvesting techniques. We're dealing with people who know exactly what they're doing and have access to serious equipment." The FBI thinks it's connected to an international smuggling ring, but we can't get close enough to identify the players. Michael watched Alpha settle near the fireplace. The wolf's massive form coiled with tension despite his exhaustion. "I'm coming back in," he said, the words feeling foreign in his mouth after years of isolation. "I want to help with the investigation." "Michael, you've been out of the game for 3 years," Susan said carefully. "Are you sure you're ready for this? These people have already killed anyone who got too close. Last month we lost a wildlife photographer who stumbled onto one of their operations. They made it look like an accident, but we know better." Before Michael could respond, the sound of tires on gravel made both him and Alpha freeze. A black pickup truck was making its way up the narrow dirt road to his cabin, moving slowly as if the driver was unfamiliar with the terrain. Michael's heart hammered as he recognized the distinctive sound of a diesel engine, the same type of vehicle that had left tracks at the massacre site. "Susan, I've got to go," Michael whispered into the phone. "Someone's here." "Michael, don't!" The line went dead as he clicked off the satellite phone and shoved it into his desk drawer. Alpha was already at the window, his hackles raised and a low growl rumbling in his chest. The wolf's entire body language screamed danger, and Michael trusted that instinct more than his own reasoning. He grabbed his grandfather's old hunting rifle from above the fireplace, checking to make sure it was loaded while staying out of sight of the windows. The truck's engine died, and Michael heard the slam of a door followed by heavy footsteps on his porch. 3 deliberate knocks echoed through the cabin, each one measured and confident. This wasn't a lost hiker or a concerned neighbor. This was someone who knew exactly where they were going. "Michael Harrison?" A familiar voice called out, sending ice through Michael's veins. "It's Vincent Crawford. Open up, partner." Vincent Crawford, Michael's former colleague and one-time friend, the man who had trained him in advanced tracking techniques and taught him to read the wilderness like a book. They'd worked together for 5 years before Michael's promotion to senior ranger had created an unexpected rift between them. Vincent had expected the promotion himself and had never quite forgiven Michael for what he saw as favoritism from their supervisor. Michael opened the door cautiously, keeping the rifle behind his back. Vincent stood on the porch wearing expensive outdoor gear that would have cost more than a ranger's monthly salary. High-end boots, a custom hunting jacket, and a tactical watch that gleamed silver in the morning light. His once friendly face had hardened over the years, gaining lines around the eyes that spoke of anger rather than laughter. "Vincent," Michael said carefully, "what brings you all the way out here?" "Heard through the grapevine that you might be getting back into the wildlife business," Vincent replied, his eyes scanning the cabin's interior with professional interest. "Thought I'd stop by and see how you're doing. It's been, what, 3 years since Sarah's funeral?" The casual mention of his wife's death made Michael's grip tighten on the rifle. Alpha had positioned himself behind the couch, invisible to Vincent, but ready to spring if needed. The wolf's intelligence continued to amaze Michael. Somehow, Alpha understood the need to remain hidden while still being prepared to defend. "I'm not getting back into anything," Michael lied. "Just living quietly up here, trying to stay out of everyone's way." Vincent stepped closer, and Michael caught a scent that made his blood run cold, the metallic smell of recently fired gunpowder mixed with something organic and unpleasant. It was the same combination of scents that had clung to the massacre site, embedded in the earth where innocent animals had died. "That's too bad," Vincent said, his smile not reaching his eyes. "Because I've got a proposition that might interest you. There's good money to be made in wildlife consulting these days, especially for someone with your expertise in wolf behavior." "What kind of consulting?" Michael asked, though he was beginning to suspect he already knew the answer. "Ranchers are having serious wolf problems," Vincent explained, settling into Michael's porch chair without invitation. "Losing livestock, dealing with aggressive packs that have lost their fear of humans. They need someone who can track these animals efficiently and solve their problems permanently." The euphemism wasn't lost on Michael. Vincent was recruiting him for the poaching operation, probably assuming that 3 years of isolation and financial strain would make him desperate enough to consider illegal activities. What Vincent didn't know was that his former partner was harboring one of the few survivors of his murderous campaign. "I'm not interested in that kind of work," Michael said firmly. Vincent's expression darkened slightly. "You always were too soft when it came to predators, Michael. Even back in our ranger days, you'd rather relocate a problem animal than put it down. That's not always practical in the real world." Alpha chose that moment to shift position behind the couch, and Vincent's head snapped toward the sound. His hand moved instinctively toward the gun holstered under his jacket, a movement so quick and practiced that it confirmed Michael's worst suspicions about his former partner's current activities. "What was that?" Vincent asked, his voice sharp with sudden alertness. "Probably just a squirrel in the walls," Michael replied, forcing his voice to remain casual. "Old cabin like this, they get in everywhere." Vincent stood slowly, his eyes never leaving the spot where he'd heard the sound. "Mind if I use your bathroom before I head back? Long drive up here?" Michael couldn't refuse without raising more suspicion, so he nodded toward the back of the cabin. The moment Vincent disappeared around the corner, Alpha emerged from his hiding spot and padded silently to Michael's side. The wolf's amber eyes held a warning that transcended species. This human was dangerous, a threat that needed to be eliminated. When Vincent returned, his demeanor had changed completely. The false friendliness was gone, replaced by something cold and calculating. "Nice place you've got here, Michael. Very isolated. A man could disappear up here and nobody would find him for months." "Is that a threat, Vincent?" "Just an observation," Vincent replied, but his hand remained near his weapon. "You know, it's interesting. I've been tracking a wounded wolf for the past 2 days. Trail led right up this mountain before disappearing near your property line. You wouldn't happen to know anything about that, would you?" Michael's heart pounded, but he kept his expression neutral. "I haven't seen any wolves around here. They usually avoid human settlements." "Usually," Vincent agreed, "but this particular wolf is special. It's the only survivor of a pack that got itself into some trouble recently. That wolf saw things it shouldn't have seen, and now it's a liability that needs to be cleaned up." The mask was finally off. Vincent was admitting to the massacre, confident that Michael was too isolated and vulnerable to pose a threat. What he didn't realize was that the very wolf he was hunting was standing less than 10 feet away, hidden behind a thin wooden door, ready to defend the human who had shown him kindness. "I should probably get going," Vincent said, moving toward the door. "But I'll be back, Michael. We're not done talking about that job opportunity. And if you happen to see any wounded wolves around here, you give me a call. There's a substantial reward for information leading to its capture." As Vincent's truck disappeared down the mountain road, Michael sank into his chair with shaking hands. Alpha emerged from his hiding spot and pressed against Michael's leg, the wolf's warm presence offering comfort in the face of overwhelming danger. "He's going to come back," Michael whispered to Alpha. "And next time, he won't be alone." Alpha's response was a low growl that seemed to say, "Let him come. We'll be ready." That evening, as darkness settled over the Montana wilderness like a heavy blanket, Michael made the phone call that would seal both their fates. Susan Martinez answered immediately, as if she'd been waiting by her radio all day. "Michael, thank God. What happened this morning? You cut out so suddenly I was ready to send a search team." "Vincent Crawford paid me a visit," Michael said, watching Alpha pace restlessly near the windows. The wolf hadn't relaxed since Vincent's departure, his amber eyes constantly scanning the tree line for movement. "Susan, I think he's involved in the wolf killings." The silence on the other end of the line stretched for nearly 30 seconds. When Susan finally spoke, her voice was barely above a whisper. "Vincent, are you sure? He's been working as a wildlife consultant for the past 2 years, helping ranchers with predator problems. His record's been spotless." "That's exactly what he told me," Michael replied grimly. "Said there was good money in wildlife consulting, especially for someone with my expertise in wolf behavior. He knew about the wounded survivor from the massacre, Susan. He was hunting it." "Jesus Christ," Susan breathed. "If Vincent's involved, this goes deeper than we thought. He has access to all our patrol schedules, knows our surveillance patterns, understands exactly how we operate. No wonder this poaching ring has stayed one step ahead of us." Michael's blood chilled as the implications sank in. Vincent hadn't just become a criminal. He'd become the perfect inside man for a sophisticated operation that had already claimed dozens of innocent lives. "There's something else, Susan. Something I should have told you earlier." "What?" Michael looked at Alpha, who had stopped pacing to listen to the conversation with an intelligence that continued to astound him. "The survivor from the massacre. I know where it is. It came to me for help." "Michael, you need to get that wolf to us immediately," Susan said urgently. "If Vincent knows it's alive and in your area, you're both in incredible danger. These people have already killed to protect their operation." Before Michael could respond, Alpha's head snapped toward the front door, his hackles rising in a display of pure aggression. The wolf's lips pulled back to reveal fangs that gleamed white in the lamplight, and a growl so deep and menacing emerged from his throat that it seemed to shake the cabin's log walls. Michael killed the lights immediately, plunging the cabin into darkness. Outside, he could hear the distant rumble of multiple vehicles approaching up the mountain road, at least 3 engines, possibly 4, moving slowly without headlights through the treacherous terrain. "Susan?" Michael whispered into the phone. "They're here. Multiple vehicles, moving tactical." "Hold position," Susan commanded. "I'm mobilizing a response team now, but you're 40 minutes from the nearest backup. Can you get to high ground?" Michael grabbed his rifle and emergency pack, his mind racing through escape routes he'd memorized during his years of isolation. The cabin had 2 exits, the front door that faced the road and a back door that led into dense forest. If he could reach the tree line, he and Alpha might have a chance. "I'm going mobile," he told Susan. "If you don't hear from me in 2 hours, assume the worst." "Michael, wait." The satellite phone went dead as he switched it off to preserve battery life. Alpha was already at the back door, his massive body coiled with tension. The wolf understood the danger they faced, and his survival instincts were screaming at him to run. But instead of fleeing alone, he waited for Michael, amber eyes reflecting loyalty that transcended species. The sound of truck doors slamming echoed through the night air, followed by the crunch of boots on gravel. Michael counted at least 6 distinct footfalls, meaning Vincent had brought a full team for this operation. These weren't amateurs or opportunistic criminals, they were professionals equipped for a military-style assault. "Michael Harrison," Vincent's voice carried clearly through the thin mountain air. "I know you're in there, and I know you've got something that belongs to me. Send out the wolf, and we can all walk away from this." Michael pressed himself against the cabin wall, rifle ready, and whispered to Alpha, "When I open this door, you run straight for the tree line. Don't look back. Don't wait for me. Just run." Alpha's response was immediate and definitive. The wolf moved to position himself between Michael and the door, making it clear that he had no intention of abandoning his human protector. The gesture was both heartbreaking and inspiring, a reminder that some bonds are stronger than the instinct for self-preservation. The front windows exploded inward simultaneously as high-powered rifle bullets shattered the glass and tore through the cabin's interior. Michael threw himself to the floor, pulling Alpha down with him as splinters of wood and ceramic showered around them. The attack was coordinated and devastating. They had maybe seconds before the assault team breached the building. "Last chance, Michael," Vincent shouted over the gunfire. "That wolf is worth more dead than alive, but I'd prefer to take it breathing. Don't make this harder than it needs to be." Michael understood now why Vincent wanted Alpha alive. A living wolf could be harvested for multiple valuable parts over time, making it worth far more than a simple pelt and teeth. The cruelty of it made his stomach turn, but it also gave him a tactical advantage. They needed Alpha intact, which meant they couldn't simply burn down the cabin or use explosive devices. He kicked open the back door and gestured frantically for Alpha to escape into the forest. This time the wolf didn't hesitate. He bounded through the doorway and disappeared into the darkness between the pine trees. Michael was right behind him, crashing through underbrush and fallen logs as bullets whined overhead. The forest at night was a maze of shadows and hidden obstacles, but Michael's years of ranger training served him well. He knew these mountains intimately, understood how to move silently through terrain that would trip up his pursuers. Behind him, he could hear Vincent's team crashing through the woods like a herd of angry bulls, their expensive tactical gear no match for intimate knowledge of the wilderness. Alpha appeared beside him as if materializing from the darkness itself, matching Michael's pace effortlessly despite his healing shoulder wound. The wolf's night vision was superior to any human technology, and he began leading them along game trails that were nearly invisible even in daylight. For 20 minutes they ran through the forest in a deadly game of cat and mouse. Michael's lungs burned from the thin mountain air, and sweat poured down his face despite the cool night temperature. Behind them, the sounds of pursuit were getting closer. Vincent's team had night vision equipment and GPS devices that gave them significant advantages in the hunt. They reached a rocky outcropping that Michael remembered from his ranger days, a natural fortress with good sight lines and multiple escape routes. It was defensible but not impregnable, which meant they could hold out for a while but couldn't stay indefinitely. "This is where we make our stand," Michael whispered to Alpha, checking his rifle's ammunition. He had 30 rounds total, enough for a sustained firefight if he made every shot count. Alpha seemed to understand the tactical situation. The wolf positioned himself behind a large boulder where he couldn't be seen from below, but where he could launch an attack if anyone tried to reach their position. His amber eyes glowed with fierce intelligence and absolute determination to protect the human who had shown him kindness. The first of Vincent's men appeared at the base of the outcropping 15 minutes later, their forms visible through Michael's rifle scope. They moved with military precision, communicating through hand signals and advancing in a coordinated pattern that spoke of extensive training. "I count 4 of them," Michael whispered to Alpha. "Vincent's probably hanging back, directing the operation from a safe distance." That's when Vincent's voice echoed up from the darkness below, amplified by some kind of electronic device. "You're trapped up there, Michael. My men have you surrounded, and there's nowhere left to run. Send down the wolf and I'll let you walk away from this. You have my word." Michael almost laughed at the absurdity of trusting Vincent's word after everything that had happened. Instead, he called back, "Your word isn't worth much these days, Vincent. How many innocent animals have you slaughtered for money?" "Innocent?" Vincent's voice carried genuine anger now. "Those wolves killed my son, Michael. 8 years ago, Danny was camping with his scout troop when a rabid wolf attacked their campsite. My boy died trying to protect his friends, torn apart by a creature that should have been eliminated long before it had the chance to hurt anyone." The revelation hit Michael like a physical blow. Vincent's crusade against wolves wasn't just about money. It was about revenge, about a father's grief twisted into something dark and consuming. It didn't excuse the massacres, but it explained the methodical cruelty, the personal satisfaction Vincent seemed to take in each kill. "I'm sorry about Danny," Michael called out, and he meant it. "But killing innocent wolves won't bring him back. You're destroying entire families, Vincent. You've become the monster you think you're fighting." "Those aren't families," Vincent snarled. "They're killing machines, and everyone I put down saves human lives. Now send me that wolf, or I'll come up there and take it myself." Michael's response was to chamber around in his rifle and settle into a comfortable shooting position. Alpha pressed against his leg, offering silent support and shared determination. Whatever happened next, they would face it together. The battle for their lives was about to begin. The first assault came at midnight, when Vincent's men believed darkness would give them the advantage. Michael watched through his rifle scope as 4 figures moved up the rocky slope in a coordinated pattern, their night vision goggles glowing faintly green in the darkness. These weren't amateur poachers. They moved with the precision of military contractors, each man covering the other's advance with practiced efficiency. Alpha sensed the approaching danger before Michael's human eyes could track the movement. The wolf's entire body went rigid, his amber eyes fixed on a section of forest where shadows seemed to shift unnaturally. A low growl rumbled in his chest, so quiet that only Michael could hear it, but filled with deadly promise. "Easy, boy," Michael whispered, adjusting his rifle's scope for the range. "Let them get closer." The lead attacker was 50 yards away when Michael's first shot rang out across the mountainside. The .30-06 round took the man's center mass, spinning him around and sending him tumbling down the rocky slope. His night vision equipment shattered against the stones, and his scream of pain echoed through the forest like a wounded animal. The other 3 men immediately took cover, their coordinated advance dissolving into chaos. But Vincent's voice crackled over their radio communications, audible even at Michael's elevated position. "He's got the high ground and good sight lines. Alpha team, flank left. Bravo team, suppress his position while Charlie moves up the right side." Michael realized with growing dread that Vincent was directing this assault like a military operation, complete with coordinated flanking maneuvers and suppressive fire. These men weren't just poachers, they were mercenaries, probably former military personnel who had turned their combat skills toward illegal wildlife trafficking. The suppressive fire began immediately, high-powered rifle rounds cracking against the rocks around Michael's position and sending stone fragments flying. He was forced to duck behind his boulder as bullets whined overhead, their impacts creating sparks in the darkness. Alpha pressed himself flat against the ground, his survival instincts understanding the mortal danger they faced. Through the chaos of gunfire, Michael heard boots scraping against rock from 2 different directions. The flanking teams were moving while their partner kept him pinned down, using classic military tactics that he recognized from his Army Reserve training years ago. In less than 5 minutes, they would have him surrounded with no escape route. That's when Alpha made a decision that would haunt Michael for the rest of his life. The wolf suddenly bolted from their defensive position, not retreating toward safety, but charging directly down the slope toward the flanking team on their left. Michael's heart stopped as he watched Alpha's massive form bound between the trees, moving with deadly purpose despite his healing shoulder wound. "Alpha, no!" Michael screamed. But it was too late. The wolf hit the first flanker like a guided missile, 130 pounds of muscle and fury colliding with the man at full speed. The impact sent both of them tumbling down the mountainside in a tangle of limbs and snarling rage. Michael heard the man's rifle discharge wildly into the air, followed by screams that weren't entirely human. The distraction gave Michael the opening he needed. He rolled out from behind his boulder and put 2 quick shots into the suppressive fire position, silencing the automatic weapon that had been keeping him pinned down. But his tactical victory felt hollow as he listened to the sounds of Alpha's desperate battle echoing up from the forest below. Vincent's voice crackled over the radio again, but now it carried a note of savage satisfaction. "Target acquired." "And the wolf is down. Repeat, the wolf is down." Michael's world collapsed around him. He abandoned his defensive position and raced down the slope toward the sounds of combat, his rifle forgotten in his hands. Branches tore at his clothes and face as he crashed through the underbrush, following the trail of broken vegetation that marked Alpha's desperate charge. He found them in a small clearing 30 yards below his original position. Alpha lay motionless on his side, dark blood pooling beneath his magnificent silver coat. The flanker he'd attacked was crawling away with obvious injuries, leaving a trail of his own blood across the forest floor. But it was Vincent who stood over Alpha's still form, a smoking pistol in his hand and triumph written across his weathered features. "You always were too attached to wild animals, Michael," Vincent said without looking up. "It's a weakness that I should have recognized years ago." Michael's rifle came up instinctively, but Vincent was faster. The pistol swung toward him with practiced speed, and Michael found himself staring down the barrel of a .45 caliber weapon held by a man who had already proven his willingness to kill. "Drop it," Vincent commanded. "Your pet wolf is dead, and you'll join him if you don't start showing some sense." Michael's hands shook as he let his rifle fall to the forest floor. Alpha's body lay between them. The wolf's amber eyes closed in what looked like peaceful sleep. The sight broke something fundamental inside Michael's chest, a pain so sharp and consuming that it felt like his heart was literally tearing apart. "Why?" Michael whispered, his voice barely audible. "Danny died 8 years ago. How does killing innocent wolves bring him back?" Vincent's face twisted with old grief and fresh rage. "Because every wolf I kill is one less monster in the world. Because maybe if I eliminate enough of them, some other father won't have to watch his son die the way I did. Because it's the only thing that makes the pain stop, even for a few minutes." "That's not justice," Michael said, tears streaming down his face as he knelt beside Alpha's still form. "That's just revenge. And it's destroying you." "Maybe," Vincent admitted, his pistol never wavering. "But it's kept me going for 8 years, and it's made me very wealthy in the process. This wolf alone was worth $50,000 on the black market. His organs, his pelt, his bones, every part has value to someone willing to pay." Michael gently placed his hand on Alpha's neck, feeling for a pulse he knew wouldn't be there. But instead of cold stillness, he felt something that made his heart leap with desperate hope. A faint, barely perceptible heartbeat fluttering beneath the wolf's thick fur. Alpha was alive, unconscious, but breathing. Vincent's shot had grazed the wolf's skull, stunning him into apparent death, but not delivering the fatal wound it appeared to be. Michael kept his expression neutral, not wanting to alert Vincent to Alpha's survival, but inside his chest, hope bloomed like a wildfire. "The Federal Task Force knows about you now," Michael said, trying to buy time for Alpha to regain consciousness. "Susan Martinez is already mobilizing a response team. You'll never get away with this." Vincent laughed, a sound devoid of humor or warmth. "Susan Martinez has been chasing shadows for 6 months. My operation spans 3 states and involves people in positions of authority she could never touch. This wolf was the only witness who could have identified me. And now that problem is solved." "There will be evidence," Michael insisted. "Forensic analysis, ballistics testing, DNA samples from the massacre sites." "All circumstantial," Vincent replied confidently. "I'm very good at what I do, Michael. I learned from the best rangers in the service, studied every technique for avoiding detection and covering tracks. The only real threat to my operation was this wolf's ability to identify me by scent, and that threat has been eliminated." Vincent's remaining men emerged from the forest, carrying their wounded comrade between them. The man Alpha had attacked was conscious but clearly in pain, blood seeping through makeshift bandages around his arm and shoulder. The wolf's attack had been devastating, even in his injured condition. "Boss, we need to get Williams to a hospital," one of the men reported. "That animal nearly tore his arm off." "Load him in the truck," Vincent ordered. "We'll drop him at the county hospital and claim it was a bear attack. No one will question it." As the men carried their wounded companion away, Vincent turned his attention back to Michael. Now we come to the difficult part. You've seen too much, know too much about my operation to be allowed to walk away. I genuinely regret this, Michael. We were friends once. Michael closed his eyes, his hand still resting on Alpha's neck where that faint heartbeat continued its steady rhythm. He'd failed to protect Sarah, failed to save Alpha's pack, and now he was about to fail in protecting the one creature who had brought meaning back to his life. But sometimes, miracles happen when hope seems lost forever. Vincent raised his pistol toward Michael's head, his finger tightening on the trigger with the cold efficiency of a man who had killed before. But in that moment of impending death, Alpha's amber eyes snapped open with startling clarity. The wolf had been conscious for the past minute, listening to every word while gathering his strength for one final act of loyalty. Alpha exploded upward from his prone position with supernatural speed, his powerful jaws clamping down on Vincent's gun hand before the shot could be fired. The pistol discharged harmlessly into the air as Vincent screamed in pain and shock, the weapon spinning away into the darkness as Alpha's fangs found their mark. Michael rolled away from the struggle, scrambling for his dropped rifle as Vincent and Alpha tumbled across the forest floor in a deadly embrace. The wolf was operating on pure adrenaline now, his survival instincts overriding the concussion that should have left him unconscious. But Vincent was no easy opponent. Years of hunting had kept him strong and agile, and he managed to draw a hunting knife from his belt even as Alpha's teeth sought his throat. The blade flashed silver in the moonlight as Vincent drove it toward Alpha's ribs, but Michael's rifle shot rang out first. The .30-06 round took Vincent in the shoulder, spinning him away from Alpha and sending the knife flying into the underbrush. Vincent collapsed against a fallen log, clutching his wounded arm while blood seeped between his fingers. "It's over, Vincent," Michael said, keeping his rifle trained on his former partner while Alpha limped to his side. The wolf was swaying on his feet, clearly fighting the effects of his head injury, but his amber eyes burned with fierce determination to protect his human companion. Vincent laughed through his pain, a sound bitter with defeat and old grief. "You think this ends with me? I'm just one piece of a much larger operation, Michael. There are dozens of teams like mine working across the country, and they won't stop just because you killed one soldier." "Then we'll stop them all," came a new voice from the darkness. Susan Martinez emerged from the tree line with 6 federal agents, their tactical lights cutting through the forest shadows like searchlights. They moved with practiced efficiency, surrounding Vincent's position while keeping their weapons trained on the wounded poacher. Susan's face was grim with professional satisfaction as she surveyed the scene. "Michael Harrison, you beautiful bastard," she said with obvious relief. "When we lost your radio signal, I thought we were coming to collect bodies." "How did you find us?" Michael asked, keeping his rifle on Vincent while the federal agent secured the scene. "We intercepted Vincent's radio communications and triangulated his position," Susan explained. "Been tracking his operation for months, but we could never get close enough for a clean arrest. When you called about the massacre, it gave us the break we needed." Agent Sarah Chen, the federal task force leader, knelt beside Vincent to examine his wounds. "Vincent Crawford, you're under arrest for violation of the Endangered Species Act, conspiracy to commit wildlife trafficking, and murder in the first degree." She began reading him his rights while field medics worked to stabilize his shoulder wound. "Murder?" Michael asked, confusion evident in his voice. "The wildlife photographer I mentioned," Susan replied grimly. "We found evidence at Vincent's property linking him to Thomas Brennan's death last month. Brennan got too close to documenting their operation, so they eliminated him and made it look like a climbing accident." Vincent's face twisted with defiant rage even as the medics bandaged his wounds. That photographer was going to expose everything we'd built. Years of work, millions of dollars in infrastructure, all threatened by one man with a camera. "Sometimes elimination is the only practical solution." "Just like Danny's death was the practical solution to your grief?" Michael asked, his voice heavy with disgust. Vincent's expression shifted, revealing something broken and desperate beneath the criminal facade. You don't understand what it's like to watch your child die, Michael. To hold your son while he bleeds out from wounds that should never have happened. Every wolf I killed was a small piece of justice for Danny, a tiny payment against the debt this world owes me. Agent Chen looked up from her field notes with professional interest. Tell us about Danny's death, Mr. Crawford. Our investigation suggests there might be more to that story than you've admitted. Vincent's face went pale, and for the first time since his arrest, genuine fear flickered in his eyes. I don't know what you mean. We pulled the medical examiner's report from 8 years ago, Chen continued relentlessly. Daniel Crawford died from injuries sustained in a fall, not from a wolf attack. The animal bite wounds were inflicted post-mortem, likely by scavengers after the body was discovered. The revelation hit Michael like a physical blow. The wolf attack was a lie? Danny fell from a cliff while hiking with friends, Chen explained. Vincent found the body 3 days later and couldn't accept that his son's death was just a tragic accident, so he created a narrative that gave his grief a target, something to blame and destroy. Vincent's composure finally cracked completely. He was supposed to be safe on that camping trip. I taught him to be careful in the wilderness, taught him every survival skill I knew. But he died anyway. Died alone and afraid while I was hundreds of miles away on a stupid training exercise. Tears streamed down Vincent's weathered face as years of suppressed grief finally broke free. I needed someone to blame, something to hate more than I hated myself for not being there. The wolves became that target, and killing them was the only thing that made the pain stop. Michael felt a complex mixture of pity and revulsion as he watched his former partner's breakdown. Vincent's crimes were unforgivable, but the man's pain was achingly real. Grief had twisted him into something monstrous, but underneath the killer was still a father who had never learned to process his devastating loss. Alpha suddenly swayed on his feet, the adrenaline that had sustained him through the fight finally wearing off. Michael dropped his rifle and caught the wolf as he collapsed, cradling Alpha's massive head in his lap while examining the bullet graze across his skull. We need a veterinarian immediately, Michael called to the federal agents. This wolf has been through hell, and he's the only survivor who can testify to what Vincent's team did to his pack. Already arranged, Susan replied, keying her radio. Dr. Patricia Vance from the Montana Wildlife Center is en route with a mobile surgical unit. She's the best wildlife veterinarian in the state. Agent Chen finished securing Vincent's confession and turned her attention to Michael. We're going to need a full statement about everything you witnessed, but that can wait until tomorrow. Right now, our priority is getting medical attention for both you and the wolf. As if summoned by her words, Dr. Vance arrived with her team 20 minutes later. The veterinarian was a compact woman in her 50s with graying hair and hands that moved with practiced confidence as she examined Alpha's injuries. Her portable surgical lights illuminated the forest clearing like a makeshift operating room. Concussion, bullet graze, and severe exhaustion, she diagnosed after a thorough examination. But he's incredibly strong and determined to survive. With proper care, he should make a full recovery. Michael watched anxiously as Dr. Vance's team prepared Alpha for transport to their wildlife center. The wolf's amber eyes never left Michael's face, as if he was afraid his human protector might disappear if he looked away. He's going to be fine, Dr. Vance assured Michael, but he'll need several weeks of rehabilitation before he can be released back into the wild. You're welcome to visit him during his recovery. What about his pack? Michael asked. Vincent's team killed his entire family. Even if Alpha recovers physically, can a wolf survive emotionally after that kind of trauma? Dr. Vance's expression grew thoughtful. Wolves are remarkably resilient. and we've had success integrating lone survivors with other packs. There's a group of young wolves at our center who lost their parents to a forest fire last year. Alpha might be able to form new family bonds with them. As the medical team loaded Alpha into their transport vehicle, the wolf's eyes found Michael one last time. In that golden gaze, Michael saw gratitude, trust, and something that looked remarkably like love. The unconditional affection of a creature who had found salvation in the kindness of a broken man. Vincent was loaded into a separate ambulance, his shoulder wound requiring surgery before he could be transported to federal detention. As the vehicle pulled away, he called out through the open doors, "This won't bring back your wife, Michael. Saving one wolf won't make up for all the lives you couldn't save." The words hit their intended target, reopening wounds that had never fully healed. But this time, Michael didn't collapse under the weight of his guilt. Alpha had taught him something profound about loyalty, sacrifice, and the possibility of redemption. Some bonds transcend loss, and love, whether human or animal, has the power to heal even the deepest wounds. 3 months later, Michael stood at the edge of the Montana Wildlife Center's observation deck, watching Alpha play with his new pack in the sprawling enclosure below. The wolf had not only survived his injuries, but had emerged as the natural leader of 5 young wolves who had been orphaned by various tragedies across the state. Dr. Vance had been right. Alpha's capacity for forming new bonds was remarkable, and his pack family was thriving under his protective guidance. "He's ready," Dr. Vance said quietly, joining Michael at the railing. "Physically, he's completely healed. Emotionally, he's found his purpose again with these younger wolves. It's time to give them their freedom." Michael nodded, though his heart clenched at the thought of saying goodbye to Alpha again. Over the past months, he'd visited every week, watching the wolf's recovery and marveling at his resilience. Alpha always seemed to know when Michael was coming, positioning himself near the fence where they could maintain eye contact across the barrier that separated their worlds. The legal proceedings had concluded the previous week with Vincent's sentencing. 25 years in federal prison for wildlife trafficking, racketeering, and the murder of photographer Thomas Brennan. The judge had been particularly harsh in her sentencing remarks, calling Vincent's crimes an assault on the natural heritage that belongs to all Americans. The broader investigation had led to arrests in 12 states and the dismantling of an international smuggling network worth over $50 million. "There's something else," Dr. Vance continued. "The U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service has offered you a position as a special consultant on human-wildlife conflict resolution. They were impressed by your work in breaking up the poaching ring, and they need someone with your experience to help prevent future incidents." Michael considered the offer carefully. For 3 years, he'd hidden from the world and his responsibilities, convincing himself that isolation was safer than engagement. But Alpha had taught him that some bonds are worth the risk, that love and loyalty require courage and action. Sarah wouldn't have wanted him to spend the rest of his life as a hermit, consumed by guilt over circumstances beyond his control. "I'll take the job," he said finally. "But I want to be involved in Alpha's release. He deserves to choose his own territory, not have it chosen for him by bureaucrats who've never seen him run free." Dr. Vance smiled. "I was hoping you'd say that. We've identified a perfect location about 50 miles north of here, remote enough to avoid human conflict, but rich in prey animals and water sources. It's also adjacent to Glacier National Park, which means the pack will have access to thousands of protected acres." The release was scheduled for the following Tuesday, giving Michael a week to prepare emotionally for what might be his final goodbye to the creature who had saved his soul. He spent those days writing a detailed report about his experiences with Alpha, documenting the wolf's remarkable intelligence and capacity for interspecies bonding. The report would become part of a larger study on wolf behavior that Dr. Vance was conducting for the scientific community. On the morning of the release, Michael arrived at the Wildlife Center before dawn. Alpha was waiting at the fence, his amber eyes bright with anticipation that seemed almost supernatural. The wolf had somehow sensed that today was different, that freedom was finally within reach. "You ready for this, boy?" Michael asked softly, extending his hand through the fence. Alpha pressed his massive muzzle against Michael's palm, a gesture of affection and trust that never failed to move him to tears. The transport to the release site took 2 hours through winding mountain roads that climbed steadily into wilderness so remote that cell phone coverage disappeared entirely. Michael rode in the lead vehicle with Dr. Vance and several wildlife biologists, while Alpha and his pack traveled in a specially designed transport trailer that allowed them to see the passing landscape. The chosen location was a pristine valley surrounded by towering peaks and fed by a crystal-clear stream that meandered through meadows thick with wildflowers. It was the kind of place that existed in nature, documentaries and conservation posters, unspoiled wilderness where wolves could live as they had for thousands of years before human encroachment changed everything. "This is perfect," Michael breathed, stepping out of the vehicle and inhaling air so pure it seemed to cleanse his lungs. "Alpha's going to love it here." The release protocol was carefully choreographed to minimize stress on the wolves while ensuring their safety. The transport trailer was positioned near the tree line, and its doors were opened remotely so the animals could emerge at their own pace without human interference. Cameras were set up at strategic locations to document the moment for scientific purposes, but the researchers maintained a respectful distance. Alpha was the first to emerge, stepping cautiously from the trailer and testing the air with his sensitive nose. His pack followed hesitantly, clearly uncertain about this new environment, but trusting their leader's judgment. For several minutes they huddled together near the trailer, analyzing scents and sounds that would tell them whether this place was safe. Then Alpha caught a familiar scent on the mountain breeze, Michael's presence, carried by the wind from their observation point half a mile away. The wolf's head turned toward the distant figure of his human friend, and their eyes met across the valley in a moment of perfect understanding. Alpha threw back his massive head and howled, a sound so beautiful and wild that it seemed to embody everything noble about the natural world. His pack joined the chorus, their voices harmonizing in a song of freedom that echoed off the valley walls and reached into Michael's heart like a benediction. "He's saying goodbye," Dr. Vance whispered, tears streaming down her weathered cheeks. "And thank you." Michael nodded, unable to speak past the emotion clogging his throat. Alpha held his gaze for another moment, then turned and led his pack into the forest with a confidence that spoke of his readiness to reclaim his wild heritage. Within minutes they had disappeared among the pine trees, becoming shadows and memories and the promise of new generations running free. The research team maintained their observation post for 3 days, using remote cameras and radio telemetry to track the pack's movements as they explored their new territory. Alpha proved to be an exceptional leader, guiding his family to water sources, hunting grounds, and den sites with an intuitive understanding of the landscape that impressed even the most experienced wildlife biologists. On the 4th day, as Michael prepared to return to his new life as a federal wildlife consultant, Alpha appeared at the edge of the meadow where the release had taken place. The wolf stood alone, silhouetted against the morning sun, looking directly toward the observation point where Michael was packing his equipment. Michael walked slowly toward the meadow, stopping about 50 yards from where Alpha waited. The wolf could have approached closer. There were no barriers between them now, but he maintained the distance that acknowledged their separate worlds while honoring the bond they shared. They stood looking at each other for perhaps 10 minutes, man and wolf saying farewell in a language that transcended words. Alpha's amber eyes held wisdom, gratitude, and something that looked remarkably like forgiveness, For Vincent's crimes, for humanity's failures, for all the pain that both species had inflicted on each other throughout history. Finally, Alpha turned and trotted back toward the forest where his pack was waiting. But at the tree line, he paused and looked back once more, his golden gaze holding Michael's with unmistakable affection. Then he disappeared into the wilderness, carrying with him the knowledge that not all humans are destroyers, that some are protectors worthy of trust and love. Michael returned to his cabin that evening to find a package waiting on his doorstep. Inside was a leather-bound journal and a note from Sarah's sister. "I found this among Sarah's things after the funeral, but couldn't bring myself to give it to you then. I think you're ready for it now." The journal was filled with Sarah's handwriting, documenting her dreams for their future together and her hopes that Michael would find a way to heal the wounded places in his heart. The final entry, written the day before her death, brought him to his knees. Michael gives so much of himself to protecting the wild things of this world. I hope someday he learns to extend that same compassion to himself. Love isn't about perfection. It's about showing up, even when we're broken, especially when we're broken. 6 months later, Michael published a book about his experiences with Alpha titled The Wolf Who Saved My Soul. The proceeds funded a scholarship program for wildlife biology students and helped establish new protections for wolf populations across the Rocky Mountain region. Vincent's criminal organization was completely dismantled and several other poaching rings were exposed through information gathered during the investigation. Michael never saw Alpha again, but remote cameras occasionally captured images of a magnificent silver wolf leading his pack through the wilderness of northern Montana. The population was thriving, and new pups were born each spring, living proof that love, loyalty, and second chances can triumph over hatred and revenge. On quiet evenings at his cabin, Michael would sometimes hear howling in the distance and wonder if Alpha's voice was among the chorus. Whether it was or not didn't matter. The lesson remained the same. Some bonds transcend species, geography, and time itself. In saving Alpha, Michael had saved himself, discovering that redemption often comes on 4 paws with amber eyes and a heart bigger than all our human failures combined. The wild places of the world were safer because one man chose compassion over fear and one wolf chose trust over survival. Their story became legend among wildlife conservationists, a reminder that miracles still happen in the modern world. You just have to be brave enough to open your door when they come calling. Sometimes the most profound healing comes from the most unexpected places. Michael Harrison discovered this truth when a wounded wolf appeared at his door, carrying not just physical scars, but the weight of loss that mirrored his own broken heart. After 3 years of isolation following his wife's tragic death, Michael had convinced himself that love only leads to pain, that caring means inevitable heartbreak. But Alpha taught him something transformative, that our capacity to love isn't diminished by loss. It's deepened by it. Every gray hair, every line on our faces tells a story of resilience, of choosing hope over despair, of finding meaning in unexpected connections. Like Michael, many of us in our golden years carry wounds from battles we've fought, people we've lost, dreams that didn't unfold as planned. But Alpha's unwavering loyalty reminds us that it's never too late for a second chapter. Never too late to open our hearts again. The wolf didn't just seek shelter. He offered Michael the greatest gift imaginable, the chance to matter again, to protect something precious, to discover that our scars don't make us broken. They make us wise enough to recognize love when it scratches at our door. What unexpected relationship or encounter has brought healing to your life? Have you ever found yourself caring for something or someone that ended up caring for you in return? Share your story in the comments below. Your experience might be exactly what someone else needs to hear today.